Welcome. Today I'll critically evaluate the problem of consciousness as defined by David Chalmers and explore whether it can be solved.
You're a bat, a bumblebee bat, a blue bat, a purple bat, whatever kind of bat you like. Now take a moment to reflect. What does it feel like to navigate your world using echolocation? What does it feel like to hang upside down from trees to sleep? This thought experiment, originally posed by philosopher Thomas Nagel in his essay What It Is Like to Be a Bat, invites us to explore the limits of our understanding of consciousness. We can never truly grasp what it is like to be a bat. This highlights a fundamental challenge in the philosophy of mind. We cannot fully understand another creature's subjective experience or qualia. This then leads us to the hard problem of consciousness, a term popularized by David Chalmers. Chalmers distinguishes between easy problems and the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems, though scientifically difficult, concern cognitive functions we can study empirically. These problems involve what's called access consciousness, whether a mental state is accessible for reasoning, verbal report, and control of behavior. The hard problem asks something fundamentally different. Why and how do these physical processes give rise to subjective phenomenal experiences? Why do we have qualitative experiences at all? It states the hard problem is explaining why we have qualitative experiences. This gap between objective scientific understanding and subjective experience, what Chalmers calls the explanatory gap, is what makes the hard problem so compelling. The hard problem can be broken down into a how question and a why question. The how question is metaphysical. How do physical processes in the brain give rise to consciousness? They seem like completely different things ontologically. How can consciousness arise out of and interact with the brain? The why question is about function. What role does phenomenal consciousness play? Why does the brain's work in the dark produce a light of conscious awareness? Jackson Mary's room demonstrates the epistemological challenge. Mary knows all physical facts about color vision but has never seen color. When she exits her black and white room and sees red for the first time, she learns something new. As Jackson notes, when Mary sees red for the first time, she gains new knowledge. This suggests phenomenal knowledge is distinct from physical knowledge. Furthermore, Chalmers' zombie argument addresses the metaphysical problem. We can conceive of philosophical zombies, beings physically identical to us but completely lacking phenomenal consciousness. If zombies are conceivable and therefore metaphysically possible, then consciousness is something over and above physical facts, challenging physicalism. Can the hard problem be solved? Daniel Dennett argues that we can address the hard problem by redefining our understanding of consciousness. According to Dennett, consciousness is not a singular phenomenon requiring special explanation, but a collection of cognitive processes that create the illusion of a unified experience. This approach, known as heterophenomenology, posits that consciousness arises from functional processes rather than a distinct entity requiring separate explanation. Dennett suggests we can explain consciousness without needing to solve what Chalmers calls the hard problem. But critics argue that Dennett's view oversimplifies or even denies the very phenomenon requiring explanation. The qualitative aspects of consciousness, the subjective what it's like, seems irreducible to functional descriptions. Thomas Nagel and Frank Jackson present arguments suggesting the hard problem may be fundamentally difficult or impossible to solve. Nagel emphasizes that our understanding is inherently limited by a subjective perspective. His bat example demonstrates we cannot transcend our own point of view to fully grasp radically different forms of consciousness. Jackson's knowledge argument reinforces this limitation. Mary gains new knowledge, phenomenal knowledge, when she experiences color for the first time. It suggests that qualitative experiences provide knowledge that cannot be captured by physical description alone. This raises a critical question. Is consciousness an irreducible aspect of existence that resists scientific explanation? The explanatory gap may persist not because we lack data, but because phenomenal consciousness fundamentally resists third-person characterization. Some scholars argue that advances in neuroscience can help bridge the explanatory gap. Current research focuses on identifying neural correlates of consciousness, the specific brain structures and processes associated with conscious experience. Significant debate about where consciousness is located, the where. Cortical-centric views argue the cortex is vital for consciousness. Others include Solms' theory, argue consciousness arises from the subcortical structures like the brainstem. Solms proposes a dual-aspect monism view, suggesting consciousness emerges from an effective process and homeostatic regulation in the brainstem, not from the cortical computation. On his account, phenomenal consciousness is fundamentally about feelings and affect, not about information processing. Global workspace theory, which proposes that access consciousness selects phenomenal states for broadcast across the brain's global workspace. All these approaches face the same fundamental limitation. They identify correlations between brain processes and consciousness, but correlation does not explain causation. Understanding which brain regions are associated with consciousness doesn't explain why these processes produce subjective experience rather than occurring unconsciously. The hard problem has implications extending beyond abstract philosophy. Consciousness and non-human animals, for example, our uncertainty about consciousness directly impacts ethical questions. If we cannot definitively determine what creatures possess phenomenal consciousness versus mere access consciousness, how do we assign moral status? Insects have subjective experiences. These questions significantly matter for how we treat non-human animals. Similarly, in artificial consciousness, as AI systems become more sophisticated, questions about whether they possess phenomenal consciousness become practically urgent, not merely theoretical. In conclusion, the hard problem of consciousness presents a genuine and persistent philosophical challenge. Chalmers' distinguish between easy problems and the hard problem reveals a fundamentally explanatory gap between the physical processes and phenomenal experience. Whether the hard problem can be ultimately solved remains an open question, one that continues to challenge our understanding of consciousness, mind, and our place in the physical world. Thank you very much for listening.